So I lost the first business in a fire a couple years in. The building that I was in caught on fire. One of my friends, had gone all through school with her.
Well, welcome to What the 50, a podcast for women of a certain age. And I have another guest on with me today, Dorothy. Thank you for being here. How do you say your last name, just so I don't butcher it?
Andreas.
Andreas. Okay, Dorothy
Yes, thank
Andreas.
you.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on because you have an incredible and powerful story. And when we spoke a little bit last week, I was so intrigued by it. I wanted to bring you on here and just talk.
Oh, thank you, Cindy. It's really an honor to be here. And, I love the title of what you do. And yeah, I mean, at this stage in life, we have all of this experience and we're so ready to give it back.
Yes.
So thank you for featuring that.
Absolutely. So let's just dive right in. Tell me about your history starting back in high school, what you did and how you got into the business world because you are a business coach, you're an entrepreneur coach. You have a pedigree like a mile long of all the things that you've done and continue to do, and I'll get into that a little bit. But how did you start? So tell us who you are, where you came from, why it matters, all that.
Sure. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I now live in Georgia. But I grew up in Pittsburgh. 12 years of Catholic school. I went to a Votech school during high school for cosmetology.
Mhm.
Uh, Started competing as a student, did really well, got to compete internationally, earned a scholarship position, and continued my hours and passed my state board. So by the time I was 18, I was already a licensed teacher of cosmetology in the state of Pennsylvania. I was also working 3 jobs to put myself through college. And it was hard. It was exhausting. And I didn't have really financial support or emotional support for this journey. And a hair salon came up in our neighborhood for sale. So I went and met with the woman and she said, "Aren't you really young?" And I was like, I'm 19. I was 19 at the time, right? And she's like, "Well, how are you going to get the money to buy my business?" And I said, "Well, I own my car. I'm going to sell my car." And, I didn't even know what I didn't know. So,
I know that's what's so cool about it. You didn't think you could fail, except your dad said something to you, right?
yes. So I go home. I signed the contract that I was buying her business in 7 days. I had to have the money. So I went home. And I called my parents into the living room and said, I'm so excited. Like I so wanted my dad to be proud of me. And I
Yeah.
said, I'm so excited. Dad, I need your help to sell my car like this week because I just signed an agreement on Her Majesty Hair Salon, right? Her Majesty Hair Salon back in the day, right?
That's so
1980.
back in the day. Yeah.
And and I have to come up with the money. And my father just paused and looked at me and said, like, you will never be smart enough to know how to run a business. And I just don't want to be a part of watching you fail. And, Cindy, I look at it now, it was the most oddly wrapped gift that
Yeah.
I was ever given. But at the time, I have to tell you, I spent decades trying to prove him wrong
Yeah.
at my own expense.
Mm. So did that empower you? I mean, obviously it did because of where you are now, what you've done. But did some people that just crushes hearing that type of thing from a parent that would just
Oh,
crush.
yeah. No, it didn't crush me. I was like, you
Yeah.
know,
So
I'll show you. I'll show you was really my mantra.
so have you always had kind of that fire in you that you just knew you could do things?
Ne- Not at all. Like, not at all. I was a shy kid. I'd try things as they wouldn't work. I'd shrink back. I'd hide out. I read a lot, as a kid. I really didn't have it. But then here I am. Like, so here it's like I have a business. And like from the first day, things started happening. And I was like, I would go through this mantra in my head, like, uh, you're going to sink or swim. I remember like standing behind the chair with clients in it, thinking to myself, you're going to sink or swim. You cannot sink. You cannot sink. You have to learn how to swim. And that was sort of a mantra I gave myself.
Mhm.
And, at that time, 1980, there were not like resources for young women in business. There was just nothing there. It just wasn't the
Right.
time. And so, and I think this is a really important point for anybody who's, thinking about trying something new, is how do you get to be resourceful? And the resource I had was the clients that were sitting in front of me, who
Mm,
all did things and had experience, and they
right.
were all really older than me. So I would ask them, like, do you know how to interview somebody? Do you know how to fire somebody? The resource really was my clients.
That's so interesting because here you are at 19 years old, you own a salon, you've got all these clients coming in. So basically, you use that as leverage. You interviewed your clients. That's how you learned.
Mm,
Like, but you also learned business just through the day to day having the trial and error, right? Of
yes. And
what how
and
you
then that
do.
took a couple years. It really did.
Yeah.
What like I had a client on Friday morning who was a CPA. And she said to me, like 2 or 3 weeks in, how are you keeping your books? And I said, I have this like notebook that I'm writing things down in. And she said,
Wow.
if you come to my house on Tuesday nights, I'll teach you how to keep books in exchange for you doing my hair on Friday mornings. And Anne, I used to go to her house on Tuesday night. She drank really strong, warm iced tea and smoked Tareyton cigarettes. And she taught me how to keep a Dome weekly record keeping book. And,
Wow.
that was that. But really it was trial and error, Cindy. And I think this is another really important piece. I had to learn how to trust myself, that
Hmm.
if my intention was good, I would figure it out. And that even if what I tried 6 times didn't work, something would show up and help me be able to figure out like what I needed to do next. And that was that trusting myself piece. And I got to tell you, there were the conversations that were running through my head were debilitating
I
at
bet.
certain points. Like, oh my God, my dad's right. He's right. I don't know what I'm doing. What the hell am I doing? Like,
Yeah.
who am I to think I can run a business? Who am I to think somebody wants to work for me? I just had to learn to overcome that and get support for overcoming that.
So self-talk, positive
Mhm.
self-talk, and trusting yourself. I mean, that's not an easy. You don't just, I mean, at that young age, it just really impresses me that you had that awareness to trust yourself and to talk positively to yourself.
You know, um, when I think about that, is the decision I made the day that I decided I'm dropping out of college so I can come open my own business. There like I knew that my vocabulary would suffer from not having a continued education.
Right.
So I decided that I would put myself on a program as if I were in school. I would read a book a week. So every Sunday I started a new book, and by Sunday I had to finish that book. And I read books on everything. I mean, I read Stephen King and trashy romance novels, but I also read whatever books I could get my hands on. Think and Grow Rich, anything that I could get my hands on from the library was what I was reading. And so I think I was just starting to learn, like, how I learn how to be a business owner is going to be a process. And I have to really start paying attention to what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. Fascinating. So you dropped out of college,
Mhm.
you're running this business. What happens next? How do you become this huge entrepreneur, highly successful businesswoman who is sought after to speak and do all these engagements that you're involved with?
Oh, thank you so much for those accolades, Cindy. But I have to tell
For
you, there
sure.
are days that I wake up and I'm like, how
Yeah.
have I survived to this point in my life? I was so scared so much of the time. So I lost the first business in a fire a couple years in. The building that I was in caught on fire. One of my friends that, had gone all through school with her. She was in the fire, and she perished. And so I'm looking at, like, I've just lost everything, but I still have my life. My
Yeah.
friend Susan doesn't have her life anymore, so it really helped put it into perspective.
Yeah.
And I mean, I figured it out. I moved into a bigger location. I got a tanning bed when tanning beds were a hot thing. And I always loved this idea of something called a day spa. and
Yeah.
they weren't really happening in the United States yet. So I found a location, and I start like reading everything I can get my hands on about how day spas in Europe are happening. And I opened this thing called, in Regent Square, a section of Pittsburgh, Clip Salon and Day Spa, because we were primarily hair, but facials and massages and nails and, and makeup. And people used to stand this was 1986. By this time, I married, I had my first child. People would stand out on the sidewalk and just like look at the sign and come in and say, "What's a day spa?"
Oh, day
The
spa.
word day spa. People didn't know the word spa in America in
Wow.
1986. So I really had to figure out how to create a market
Mm,
for a facial that, to that point, unless you traveled, most people were like, well, I can cleanse my face at home. Why would I want to pay you a lot of money to come do it for me? So
right.
I really had to create like a marketing plan that would educate the community. And that really just started a trajectory of growth. I got very involved with a, a beauty industry organization and was elected as the Pittsburgh chapter president, um, like a year after I belonged. Uh, and that was really good. I got to make a lot of changes, not only in our city, but in other chapters around the country. And, and, by I was elected as the international president a year later in 19, by
Wow.
this point it's 1985. So I was the first female and youngest person, first female ever to preside over an American based international beauty organization. And that really put me on the map and gave me tremendous confidence. And
I
then I
bet,
come
I mean,
back.
that kind of blow your mind where you're like, how did that happen?
Oh my God. And then, as if things aren't crazy enough. So like my first official duty, I go to New York, I'm meeting with a group of Japanese delegates. And like I stopped in Philadelphia to train a chapter chair the night before. And while I'm there, at this point, I have two children now. So,
Okay.
I'm jumping ahead for timeline here, but I have like a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old son. And, um, every and a marriage that was really on the rocks.
Yeah.
And so it was a stressful time, and I just spent like months amassing a stage wardrobe for this position. And while I'm in New York on my first official duty, my house catches on fire. And we my older son was in school. He was in third grade. Their dad was at work, and my mom was babysitting my little boy. She ended up having to be taken to the hospital by an ambulance, but she was fine, thank goodness. And my little boy was traumatized. I mean, the firemen found him 2 doors away in 12 inches of snow in his
Oh my
pajamas,
gosh.
and we lost everything we had except for the shirts on our backs and the frame of our house. But we had to live in temporary housing. And so here it is, like I'm brand new in this leadership position. I have a business with 13 employees at that time. I have a stressful life, and I'm literally sleeping 5 hours a night and working 19 hours a day. And I get a call from the organization based in California, and the regional director from New York called me, Peter, and he says, uh, Dorothy, we understand you've had a crisis in your family. We can appoint somebody else to take over your position this year. And in that moment, Cindy, I just knew for the rest of my life, I would regret that. And the story would be the woman wasn't capable of handling the stress,
Mm.
And so when I think about that, I said, in the moment, I was like, yes, absolutely. Yes, I can do this. And not only am I going to do it, I'm going to grow the organization. And as I hear myself saying these words internally, I'm thinking, oh my God, at the expense of everything I know,
Yeah.
at the expense of everything I know. And I found myself a couple months later in an emergency room getting an EKG, thinking I was having a heart attack, and it didn't stop me. It didn't stop me. So this one day, like I'm working from home. It was my day off. I have a fax machine and this big honking computer. We're in a rental apartment with rental furniture, and we're like devastated, right?
Yeah.
And because we've lost everything, everything's kind of stressful, very stressful. And I'm sitting there and I'm shooing my little boy away, and he climbs up on my lap and he puts his hands on my face and he says, "Mommy, you're just not fun anymore."
Oh,
And Cindy, that was it. It was like I prided myself on being like a fun mom and
fun
having so
mom.
much fun with my kids and doing things with them in our backyard. And now we
Yeah.
didn't even have a backyard. And um, in that moment, I sat there and just said, like, "Oh dear God, please be with me here. I have got to deconstruct this life I have created for myself and figure out how to put it back together with a sense of balance in a way that I don't even know what that looks like. I don't even know what that means. And I'm the only person who can do this and save myself and save my family." And I started doing things. I started paying attention. I noticed 5 key areas of life: physical body, physical space, being,
Mhm.
one being physical, two being relationships, three being spirituality, had completely disconnected from my creator,
Mhm.
was having no higher purpose in my life, of meaning. And the next was career, and finally finances. And when I really started looking at where am I now and what do I want and what's in this gap and how do I create this, I was documenting this, and I was asked to speak to a group a short time later, and I tried out like teaching them what I had to teach myself, and it was phenomenal. That I also had a product importing distribution company, and as a value add, I started offering this, I called it time management workshop.
It
Yes,
was
there is enough
coaching.
time. Yeah, it was coaching.
Mhm.
It really was. I started offering it as a value add. If you would consider taking my line of skincare and hair care that I was importing from Italy, in exchange, I will teach you and your staff time management workshop. And the workshop started getting more traction and it was way more fun. So I've been teaching,
Wow.
it's now called the time class. I've been teaching that since 1995.
Wow. And it's based on the principles, the 5 areas that you came up with because you had to find a way to cope, to find
Yes,
balance.
yes,
So you were like physical, spiritual, relational, financial, and career. Those
yes.
5 areas. And that's what you started coaching on, and that's what you still coach on. You're also an author,
Yes.
two
Two books,
best-selling, two best-selling
two
books.
books. I should have them right here on my desk to hold up, but
Oh,
uh,
okay. One of them is on the time management, right?
well, the first one I wrote is called Streamline Success, Eliminate Chaos from Your Service Business. And it's for any entrepreneur, but it's primarily directed towards women who are growing businesses and growing families, growing relationships. And there's solid business information in there, but there's solid life information in there. And it went to bestseller. And that when it went to bestseller, like literally within a couple days, I started getting messages from people like that I didn't even know, and invitations. I'd been a keynote speaker for a lot of years, but the invitations came more, and it was really exciting. And then I was invited to do a workshop. 2 years later, I was invited to do a workshop on employee retention because from the beauty industry where I started, um, I had virtually no turnover
Yeah,
in a.
because there's a lot of turnover in the beauty industry, right?
Oh my gosh, it's really an issue.
Yeah.
It's really an issue, and it's devastating to businesses. And the people who are turning themselves over don't have any clue until maybe someday they have their own business. So I learned ways. I started systematizing my business like decades ago, putting systems in place that could be replicated so I could open multiple locations. And the
Mhm.
stronger the system was, the better the company was. The more congruency there was between the multiple locations. And, I was looking into franchising and decided not to do that. But, as that was all happening, um, like I was retaining employees for decades who were happy, who were making money, who were
Yeah.
fulfilled and proud of what they did. And, like we came together with a really clear mission that our mission was to make you feel fabulous. And if the front stage of my business was making the clients feel fabulous, how did we have to be? How did we get to be on the backstage to make that all happen? So anyhow, I was invited in to teach a workshop on employee retention, um, and to a chain of a restaurant chain of all the general managers. And right before I go live, like on stage, the CEO walks in, and I'm like, I knew who he was, but I had never met him. And here he is, and he comes and he sits in the front seat, and I'm like, oh, I was like nervous, and then I'm like, take a deep breath, take a pause, trust myself.
Yeah.
I know what I'm talking about. This is my life. I don't have to remember anything. It's not like I'm going to forget what happened to me over my life if I get off track or something. Anyhow, it went really well. And at the end, he stood up and he reiterated many of my points and said, those are things we just never think about in the restaurant. And then he said, if you have a book on this, I'll buy one. I'll buy a copy for every manager in our system. And I said, well, I'm writing one. And I went home that day and started to write the book.
Really? Just based on
Yes,
that?
based on that. And I had been thinking that I wanted to write a book on conflict, like conflict, people were like, oh my God, why'd you pick conflict? If we don't manage conflict, conflict is managing us.
So that's your second book, the one on conflict?
The second book is Conflict Revelation. It also, as crazy as the universe sets things up for us, the week of George Floyd's death was the week that I launched Conflict Revelation.
Amazing.
I mean, it had been planned for months, and that happened. And I just thought, I just wish everybody could read this book, because if people read this book, there will be so much better of an understanding of how people get along on this earth that we live on. And it went to international bestseller in 9 categories in a couple days, and that was really very exciting. And it was around that time that I was like, I really need to sell my company. I had stepped back. I had a fabulous manager, a young woman who had been managing it for 12 years. And I approached her and said, I think you need to think about buying the company. And at first she was like, no. I said, that's for you. That's not for me. And I was like, I will work with you to get you up to speed. You are so much more capable than you are.
Wow.
And, we hired a coach to coach her through some of the things. And I basically opened the books up to her and said, here's every password you need to know. You need to be 100% confident about what it is you're buying. Anything that you haven't seen to this point in the 12 years of being with me, you get to see it and run it. Then we have the COVID shutdown. So she got to live through a crisis. The sale was supposed to happen during the crisis, and the shutdown, it didn't. We had to wait to come out on the other end. But what was brilliant about that was she experienced a business crisis. And I said to her, here, you run it. I'm here for support, but you have to feel what it's like, because businesses have crisis.
Right. Right. Wow.
And yeah, it worked out beautifully.
Yeah. What a win-win, right? You wanted to sell your company. She was in a position to buy it. She didn't know she could really do it, but you coached her through it. Win-win. That's amazing. So your book, The Conflict Revelation, is this just based on what you've learned in your years in business, how to deal with conflict?
It really is. I mean, when way back in my 20s, I put myself into landmark education, personal development stuff. I'd read, and I stayed with Landmark for a lot of years. Put myself into therapy because I was raising 2 sons. I didn't want to repeat the patterns that the men in my family did. It was not cool. It was not cool. And I was a product of that kind of energy and environment. So I'm in Landmark working hard. I'm in therapy working hard. I'm, in my business working hard, and in my family working hard, but it all had a sense of joy. It really, truly had a sense of joy. because I started to see that it was creating change in me, that I could understand why I was making the decisions I was making, why I was making the mistakes, the people I was attracting in that I didn't, you know, necessarily weren't, that we weren't aligned. And I really, the opening story in the book happened on an airplane, and it's really crazy. It was one of those, you know how sometimes something happens to you and it's so powerful and so profound, and for anybody who wasn't there, they're never going to understand it. Like when a truck runs your car off the road and you almost collide, but you save yourself,
Right,
and you can't tell anybody
right, because they
what
won't
that felt
believe
like.
it.
Right.
Well,
It's
they don't get it.
they don't get it because they didn't live through it. Well, this experience with another human being on an airplane was so profound that when we were total strangers, we got off the airplane, we parted ways, and we both just stood like 50 feet away from each other in the airport, like, what just happened? This was crazy. And I wasn't even thinking about putting that in the book. I was working with an editor and she had all the final edits done. And I remember thinking to myself, there's still something missing. Like there's something missing. And I was like, well, when I think about odd, crazy, profound things that have happened to me, and I remembered this. So I wrote it out and I sent it to her and I said, do you think there's a place for this in the book? And she said, this is the opening story.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, you know, okay, here we go. And
Wow.
it really is, the book is, it's an easy read. It's an hour and 10 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes. It's based on three concepts: embracing conflict, because we always try to avoid it,
Yeah, we
right?
do. We do, don't we? Mhm.
Yes. Even that negative self-talk, that's conflict in our head. And
Yeah.
as long as we're resisting what we're afraid of, it's growing. So really stepping in and embracing what conflict means to us, what it meant to our family, what it is in our environment, um, how we feel about our ability to manage it, what our triggers are, really getting clear with ourselves about embracing the idea of concept, empowering ourselves, like really educating ourselves on, you know, again, what's in the gap? Here's what I know, and here's what I really feel I could know. How do we learn that? And there's a lot of tips and techniques in the middle part of the book. And then the third one is executing a plan. So we really reduce chaos and conflict in our life, both personal and professional. And yeah, it was a fun book to write.
So because of the books, basically that kind of puts you, well, you were speaking before the books, right? You were a keynote
I had
speaker.
been a keynote speaker. I had been a keynote speaker since the 90s. When I started really doing some different concepts in business that weren't normal, you know, groups would call me in to speak about what I was doing. And I was always, for whatever crazy reason, comfortable speaking on stage.
Really?
And yes, and I didn't know that I ever would be, but it was just like, if I paid attention to what I knew and got up on stage talking about what I knew to be true rather than trying to remember things, it
Mm.
would be easy. And I
Yep.
think for anybody, I actually teach a course along with a friend of mine. We teach a course called Smart Women Speak Up, and it's getting women
I
over their
love it.
fear of public speaking.
I love it.
Mhm.
Smart women speak up.
Yes.
Okay, so in addition to that course, you have
Mhm.
another course that's called
I have the time class that
the time
we're in
class.
session right now.
Okay.
We're in, it's a 6 session program. We're in session right now with that. That's exciting. And I run that usually 2 times a year. And it's creating life balance and reducing uh, chaos and conflict in your life, personal and professional, as you're growing your company. Similar to what I do in my private consulting, excuse me, really helping entrepreneurs get out of their own way and scale to the 7-figure mark. And then I teach another course along with a male partner from California, Jeff Faudalin, who's a coach. I met him. I hired him as my coach, and we immediately started. You know, let's teach a course together. And we've taught several courses together, but the current one we have is called Program for Prosperity. And we're teaching that for an audience in Kuala Lumpur in September.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's
That's pretty
exciting.
amazing. So in addition to the courses that you teach, you also have one-on-one clients that your entrepreneur clients
Yes.
that you teach
Yes.
them, of course, depending on what they need, but you
Hmm.
teach them how to scale.
Yes.
So that must be incredibly gratifying for you, right? To see
It
their
really
success.
is. It really is. You know, I'm working with a young client, right? And I work with both men and women.
Okay.
Initially, when I started out, it was really primarily women, and now it's really, if it's a fit, we go through a
Yeah.
really deep discovery call to figure out if I'm right for you and you're right for me. Because my consulting is not inexpensive. I bring
Sure.
42 years of experience to it, so I want to make sure that they're getting their money's worth from me, and
Mm.
I have to know I'm a good fit for them and that they're willing to do the work. And I'm working with a young person right now, and oh my gosh, it's just, I'm so invigorated and inspired by her because she doesn't have years of baggage.
Mm.
So when she does the work, I know her life is going to be forever changed. It's not like we have to break a 20-year-old pattern of picking bad boyfriends because,
Right.
so
Right.
yes.
How much of the personal work needs to go on with somebody in order to achieve success in the business arena? Because if you're a mess personally, like in your own spiritual, your emotional, relational side of you, can you really be super successful financially and in your career? How related are they?
I think it catches up with you, right? And I think if you have like a hot product or a new concept, something that's new, and there's a need for it in the market and the time is right, like the timing is right, the market is right, and your offer, whether it's a service or a product, are right, you're really going, you're really going to have some level
You're
of
gonna have,
success
yeah,
in spite of yourself.
yeah,
But to long-term sustain it and grow it, it's people procrastinate on creating massive success because they're afraid of failure
yeah,
and they're afraid of success and
yes.
everything that comes along with it.
Yes, because if you truly explode, you're super successful, then I mean, there's so much involved there, that your deserve level, right? Do I really
Mm-hmm,
deserve this? And
mm-hmm.
then what do I do when I have this kind of success and money? I mean, it's kind of trippy, right? It can really trip you up.
It is. And it's crazy what stops us. And what stops us, I have to tell you, is so deep. We do a lot of really, really deep work in working with me. We go way back to the origin, the source of whatever it was. Last year I worked with a woman, brilliant, beautiful, like so together, and she's in the coaching space, had been running a very, very successful coaching practices. We did a course together. That's how I knew her, and we became really good friends. And she called me and said, um, I'd like to coach with you. And I said, look, we're friends, just what do you need, let me support you.
Yeah.
And she said, no, I want your coaching energy, I want to enter into it. And I said to her, we knew each other. We got to know each other over the year. And I said, we're going to address the abortion you had when you were 14 years old that I do not believe you've really dealt with yet. And she said, no, I've been through everything. I've dealt with that, Dorothy. I really have. I really have. And I said, what's stopping you from making money is you not believing that you deserve it.
Right.
And that guilt and that shame and the grief that has really never been properly dealt with. I mean, I was going on intuition and bits and pieces I'd picked up in being her
Yeah.
friend. So we went there. We worked together for 1 month, and I typically don't work with people for only 1 month at a time. We have much longer contracts because it takes that much time. But she was very an evolved thinker. We worked together for 4 sessions, and in the one session, we did very, very deep work, very deep, intense work on going back to that part of herself she turned her back on that day in the clinic when she was 14 years old and hated herself for not being able to figure out a different
Mhm.
solution.
Mhm.
And it was powerful. I mean, it was profoundly powerful. And then, we talked about some strategies for her to get her coaching practice really on track. 2 weeks later, she made $10,000.
Wow.
Like she texted me. She's like, this is so crazy. Like after a complete dry spell, here it is. And I'm building a group. And I mean, she's just absolutely gone out there and blown it up. But for a coach who's had a dry spell for a long time to make $10,000 in 1 week is
Sure.
really,
Yeah.
and it was absolutely because we got her guilt that was so subconsciously buried, and shame, that like if she was really wonderful, how could she be so wonderful if she had this piece of her? So once we embraced that piece of her,
Wow.
it changed everything, and
That's
she's
fascinating.
doing phenomenally well. Yes.
I mean, I think so many of us, especially women, I think that we carry a lot of shame. I
Oh
think
my
it's just the
gosh.
way we're wired. We carry guilt and shame, and how freeing and liberating that would be if we could find a way to let that go, accept who
Cindy,
we are and move forward.
oh my gosh, I'm so glad you brought this up. I think this is such an important concept for women. So we are conditioned to please people,
Yeah.
right? From the time we're brought onto this earth, women are conditioned to please people and make them happy, and
Yeah.
at our own expense. And when we start to look at intimacy and what happens with intimacy, and I've done a lot of work with people around this area, and it's like always the same. We get intimate with somebody because we really are looking for love. We just want to be loved and nurtured in a way that this person reflects back to us what we were denied as a younger person. And then when we get into the intimate situation and we're not really sure what we're doing, because how do we know what we're doing? I mean, how do we know? And then we pretend that we're satisfied when we're really not.
Hmm.
And in that pretense, unbeknownst to us, we are carrying so much guilt and shame that there's something wrong with me. And this is all subconscious, unconscious stuff. I'm going to over deliver to you because I feel guilty that I'm
Wow.
pretending I'm not as satisfied as you think I am. And the poor guy is being conditioned to think everything's great because we're pretending, because we want them to be happy at our own expense.
I think we all do that
Mm-hmm.
to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm. In every area, we do it with money, we do it with our children, we do it with our friendships, we do it with our primary relationships and our partners, and yeah.
That's crazy. So if we pretend, with anything, not just intimacy, when we're pretending, it causes us to feel guilty. So
Mm-hmm.
we feel guilty for pretending, then we carry that shame with us, which that's like snowball effect.
It's such a downward cycle, and we get sucked down in it, and it chips away at our confidence. And so, if we think about the term authenticity, um, if when our casket is closing,
Hmm.
how fabulous would it be to say, I lived an authentic life? So, what would an authentic life like? No regrets, no regrets. Every relationship we have is complete. So that if, we're hit by a bus tomorrow, that
Right.
person isn't left with anything but understanding the love that was between us.
Hmm.
Even if this is like our mortal enemies, we get to work it out. So to me, authenticity is if we're thinking it on the inside, we're saying it appropriately and respectfully on the outside. If we're desiring it and wanting it on the inside, we're demonstrating it on
Hmm.
the outside. And if it's something that we really, really are like, this, I need this in my life authentically, to be authentic to ourselves, we get to create it. So we get to create the authenticity from demonstrating how we feel and speaking our truth and not being afraid how it's going to land on anybody. We're not powerful enough to change how anybody else receives us.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's where we get caught up because we're so worried about someone else's reaction to our truth,
Mm-hmm,
right? We don't want to
mm-hmm,
offend anybody. Well, I can't
mm-hmm.
tell him that because he's going to be offended, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. I don't want to make him feel badly. I don't want to upset them. So we don't say the truth and we absorb it in.
And
And
so
what's it? Yeah, it's chipping away at our
there's
self-confidence.
consequences to that.
Mhm.
And it's funny, you play that out, how it shows up in business, shows up in how you show up in the world in every area of your life.
Yes. Oh my gosh. The mother-son relationship, the child-parent relationship. You know, it's easier to feel anger towards our father for not being there when we needed him. I mean, this is the lesson that I spent decades of my life working on. It's easy to feel that because he's not the person who brought us life. And so until we address
Oh,
the underlying issue, we're either recreating it and making that same mess in our own life, or we are resisting it to the point that we're missing being who we are to avoid being like our father. So once we go back in and really address that, and I had to do it with my father after he died. So that it was interesting. It was interesting work that I got to do to understand my father at a much deeper level. But when it comes to our mother, when we have ever seen our mother suffer or be hurt, especially if it's, from our father or
yeah,
whomever it is, we feel our mother brought us life, that our role is to step in and be the crutch, the companion, the safety net. Mommy, it's okay.
hmm,
And I see this so much, that women take on characteristics of their mother because they feel sympathy for her pain, which stops women from living into their brilliant, self expressed person.
interesting.
I see a lot of that. Yep. And I
Yeah,
see a lot of beautiful, healthy relationships too. It's just not all problems, but I mean, I'm going way deep into what really stops a person from having an idea of something they want to do. And 2 years later, it's $1 million business. Three
yeah,
years later, it's $1 million business. What really stops somebody? It's deep stuff.
yeah. The connection is really crazy, and it makes me wonder because often I think we fool ourselves into thinking, "Oh, I'm healed. I'm over this." Just like your client really felt like she was over this one issue in her life when she was 14. But you uncovered that no, perhaps she had more work to do. I think a lot of us go around lying to ourselves, maybe not even consciously.
Mm-hmm,
We're okay,
mm-hmm,
yet we keep hitting these roadblocks.
mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So
I
it's,
mean, Cindy, I'm 61. I still get to work on myself every
yeah,
day.
yeah,
And how we know is when something triggers us. And by a trigger, the last election cycle that we had, people were so triggered by one or the other.
yeah,
And I would just sort of watch it, and I found it to be very entertaining. Like, and then it was disgusting, and I had to like default
yeah,
to HGTV,
yeah,
right?
yes,
And so when I saw people losing their minds on the internet about one or the other, we would only be triggered by that person or anybody. We only get triggered because it's a wound inside of us
right,
that is not healed. So when somebody like really pushes our button, if it's not a wound for us, it's a like a just notice moment. Huh? Isn't that interesting that you're saying that and you feel that way? Well, I don't agree with you, but let's move on. If we have what we despise seeing in somebody else, we can't despise seeing it in somebody else if there's not a piece of that in
right,
us. We bash in others
yeah,
what
yeah,
we're afraid to bash in ourselves.
yeah. I say if you spot it, you got it.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Love that term.
Yeah. And it's
Yes.
projection too, right? We do that all the time. But that's so true. And the whole thing about triggers and come at it from a place of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting
Yes.
that triggered me. Let me figure that out instead of, losing your mind.
Oh, I love that you said that because that is so absolutely true. Instead of getting angry, saying, what is there to learn? What is there to learn? And in the book Conflict Revelation, I share an experience. It was a deeply painful experience I went through about 6 years ago with a business that I own with some partners, and there was an employee there who represented somebody from my past that I still had an unresolved wound around, and I
Mm.
thought I had worked through it. Oh no, no, it came back and bit me, and I really like I'd been put through the washing machine on that one. I mean,
Wow.
it was really a tough time. And I could have finger pointed, I could have blamed. And what I really chose to do was say, like, what is the lesson here? Why would I have, protected this person so deeply
Mm,
that, like, I sacrificed myself?
yeah.
It was my relationship with my sister.
Wow.
And it really, had I not gotten curious about that, I would have spent a year of my life being really angry.
Hmm.
Um, so curiosity, thank you for bringing that up. That's
You're
brilliant.
welcome. Yeah.
And
And
what do you see? I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I wanted to ask, you interview a lot of women. Like, what are the common trends and threads and commonalities that you see as you interview so many women?
I see a lot of shame, like I mentioned, guilt and shame, and a lot of women not seeing potential or possibility for the
Mm,
rest of their lives. They hit a certain point. I've raised my kids. I don't know what else to do now.
mhm,
Or I don't have, and I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to ask you about this. A lot of women at our age want to do something new and different, right?
mhm,
A lot of them want to go into business, but they don't believe they can do it. They don't believe
mhm,
they have enough money. They don't
mhm,
believe they have the knowledge or the
mhm,
skills. And so they
mhm,
just simply give up.
mhm.
So I'm glad you asked me that because it forces me to ask you a question. What would you tell a woman like that who wants to become an entrepreneur, but she's in her 50s or 60s?
Yeah, I would say, what is it that excites you and you're passionate about? If you've been out in the workforce for, 20, 25, 30 years, and you're not ready to be done working, but you're ready to be done working with that piece of your career, what or even if you were a stay-at-home mom and
Right.
all of a sudden you're like, I want purpose in my life
Yes.
and I'm not sure where to find it. I always say, look at what you love to do, that you're energized when you're doing it. Nobody else really does it quite like you. And there's usually potential to make money there. So whether it's baking your special brand of Mrs. Fields kind of cookies
Yeah.
that you figure out, like, yeah, this is what I love to do, and just start. It doesn't matter what you do, just do something.
Yeah.
Do something.
And it has to be something you're passionate about. Do
Hmm.
you believe anybody can make money doing something as long as they are passionate about it? And I
I
know the
do.
marketplace determines, but
Hmm.
what's your thought on that?
I do. I mean, there are business cycles, I mean, right now, it's every time we're in a downturn and everybody's, listening to the news and getting terrified, there's a whole other sector of the marketplace that's being cultivated and
Yeah.
growing.
Yeah.
And so there's always a need for a solution. So anytime there's a hole, a gap, a problem, it's the gift card thing that we were talking about. I mean, way back in the day when online gift cards didn't exist, um, I passionately believed we could solve this for clients by them being able to go to our website and click a button that would say print a gift card. Well, we didn't even have gift cards yet. It was gift certificates, print a
Right.
gift certificate. And people laughed at that idea.
Yeah.
Online, I mean, I went through 5 code writers from around the country until finally I found some kids from Carnegie Mellon who said yes. It took me a year to find the code writers who could create what I passionately believed would be a solution for my business. And then we put out press releases, and then it transformed the beauty industry. And so if I had not paid attention to my passion, well, somebody else would have come up with it, a year
Sure.
or two later. But it really, I was passionate about the solution I knew we could create in some way. I'm not a tech person. I didn't know how to get us there. I
Right.
didn't even know how to properly protect the IP to it. That's.
So you identified the problem
Mhm,
and you said, this needs a solution. I'm going to come up with it. But you
mhm.
were also passionate about it. So
I
those seem
was
to be the key elements.
like, so let's just think like let's just say we have a guy who has, gone through a career, and his hobby was like he liked to ride bikes on the weekends, and maybe he rode with a group of guys, but he was really into it, always watched the Tour de France, did all that. And then he's done working, but he's not really ready to be done. And he loves to tinker on bikes in his garage.
Right.
So for that guy, I would say, what's the number one problem you had in getting your bikes repaired
Right.
or
Right.
finding your parts? Go there and start that.
Yeah. That's a really, really great idea. It's a great piece of advice. So, Dorothy, in wrapping this up, how can people find you? Somebody's listening to this, they're like, I want to work with her. She seems great. How can people find you?
My website is streamlinesuccess.com. My email is Dorothy@streamlinesuccess. Just, put Cindy Bell in the message, and I'll know.
Oh, nice.
On Facebook, it's just my profile page, Dorothy Andreas, LinkedIn, Dorothy Andreas,
Okay.
TikTok, Dorothy Andreas. On Instagram, it's Streamline Success.
Okay, excellent. So you do the one-on-one coaching, you do group coaching, you have a lot of different courses and things that you offer. You're also still available to speak?
Yeah, yes, I do. I mean, I have to know about the speaking, months in advance, just, but you can also go to the time class. The time class, I haven't looked at the page. I need to check in with my guy who runs it for me, but I think there's some good testimonials in the time class about like how it's changed people's life. But the timeclass.com gives you a lot of insight into the course.
Excellent. Well,
Yes.
I am going to get your book, the conflict revelation. I keep thinking resolution, but I like your play on words there. And then your first book, what was the name of that one again?
Streamline Success.
Streamline
Success. And they're both on Amazon. You can type my name in Amazon or either book, and they both show up on my page. So thank you. Thank you.
I'm so honored that you are here with me because you are just dynamite. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, there you have it. Thank you so much for listening. And please, if you enjoyed the program today, please feel free to share. I appreciate you. Get out there and start living your best damn life. Until next time, take care.